Alrighty, hello everyone. We are back. I am Kat, your lovely interviewer, here with another wonderful individual from our performance of Hamlet. And so with me today, I have Ashlee. And tell us who you were playing.
I am Ashley, and I in Hamlet played King Claudius.
Oof, what a
Yeah,
role.
yeah, it
What
really
a
was.
role right off the bat.
Yeah.
Um, right off the like speaking of right off the bat, I would love to just get a little bit of an understanding of what was your experience and familiarity with Shakespeare prior to this experience.
Well, I had never actually been in a Shakespeare play before. I'd been in a couple of other plays in community theater before, but nothing
Mm-hmm.
Shakespeare. But I've actually loved Shakespeare plays since I was probably about like 13 or so when I first like started reading them. And
Yeah.
I just loved the language in them. I didn't understand really what was happening because I never had, I don't really think I'd even watched like movie versions of them or anything at this point. So it was just
Mm-hmm.
rereading the words and trying to picture like, oh, what are the characters doing at this part? So I didn't necessarily understand the plots that much because the text gives some of the plot, but I was like 13. I was like, oh, what are they talking about? But I liked how it sounded. So I read a pretty decent amount of them as a teenager, even it was like, again with no context for, beyond what I saw on the page, not seeing the
Yeah.
staging or anything like that. But I just always enjoyed them a lot. And like Hamlet was always my favorite one, actually. So I was super excited when I saw that they're putting on production of it. And I was like, I'm going to apply for it. So I was really excited about that because it was the first time I've been in a Shakespeare play. So, and it was my favorite one at that. So I was
Oh,
excited. Yeah.
phenomenal. And you
Yeah.
were absolutely fantastic as our complicated, wonderful character of
Thank
King
you.
Claudius.
Thank you.
It was a really cool experience to see to see you go from your rehearsals to that final performance. I just think you did such a wonderful job. And
Thank
I think there
you.
are lots of people out there who would not have known that was your first Shakespeare
No.
experience, uh,
Yeah.
which I think is very, very, very much says something in that performance you did.
Thank you.
And also being 13 years old and reading Shakespeare without a lick of an idea of what that
Yeah.
man was writing.
Yeah.
Touche. Good
Yeah,
on
thank
you.
you.
Trying to piece together those context words of
Yeah.
like, okay,
Yeah, like what
what
is
the
he talking about?
heck?
Yeah. What is this language? It's, older fashioned than what I'm used to. Like, but I just always like the flow of it and the characters
Yeah.
and yeah, just the overall vibe of it.
It's like a little bit of a dance, you know?
Exactly. Exactly.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Is King Claudius someone who you imagined, or what you said that Hamlet was one of your favorite shows? Is King Claudius someone you like imagined yourself playing and wanting to perform?
Actually, no, mostly because it was a character that I thought like, oh, I'm not that type. I would not be cast as King Claudius. So I was never
Mm-hmm.
expecting to play King Claudius. And that's one thing that kind of when I went into starting, like at the beginning of the rehearsals and stuff, first of all, it was me having to come to an understanding of, because at that point, I had seen several movie versions of some Shakespeare stuff, especially Hamlet and stuff, and I had read Hamlet multiple times, so I had an
Yeah.
understanding more of like what the plot was, but I still wasn't that well versed in what the language meant and things like that, or how to perform Shakespeare even, because again, from my limited, what I'd watched and stuff like that, I didn't
Yeah.
know like how do you how do you do the different types of the meters and all the things like that. So that was kind of a learning curve of learning how to perform Shakespeare and also me having to approach it because in community theater and stuff, when I did characters, they were quite often, they were characters that fit into my type. So I didn't have to make myself like, be that different than who I was to be able to play those characters. So I didn't have to think about like, how do I play someone that's a lot different than who I am? And
Yeah.
especially, trying to think about myself being like, okay, so I'm like a middle-aged dude that's like super manly and everything and evil. I was like, so something that it was more of a curve when I went into rehearsals of trying to think how to play him because like for example one of my inspirations like one of the main things I took was I actually took a lot from Patrick Stewart's rendition of King Claudius in the I think
Mm,
2009 one, the BBC one.
I believe,
um
yeah.
Yeah, I think that's what year it was from. But yeah, that was what I took a lot from his performance because that was one of my favorite versions of King Claudius that I've seen. So I took a lot from his performance, but me trying to match up like, okay, but how do I take like he is the type who can play King Claudius without having to it be as much of a stretch for me trying to think about like all those things that are like I was like, oh no, we're so different. This is difficult. But then I started thinking about it differently after I did more rehearsals because I'm like, okay, maybe it's hard for me because I felt like I was like falling behind in my portrayal of the character. I felt like my portrayal was kind of flat. It was helpful for me to instead of trying to think about how I could make myself be King Claudius's type, to think, how could I make King Claudius be my type? To think
Boom.
about. Yeah, it made it so much easier once I thought about it that way because rather than me trying to be like, oh no, I've got to be so much different, I actually started looking for like the similarities between us. So I felt I had a deeper and better understanding of the character at that point and a much more nuanced portrayal. Because at the beginning, I was just like, I'm cold and evil. And then I started thinking about it like, at the end of the day, he's a person. He's a really bad
Mhm.
person. He does a lot of bad things. Pretty much everything, that happens in Hamlet that's tragic about it is at its core, in my opinion, because of King Claudius's actions. Like Hamlet does do a lot of stuff, but Hamlet
But
and
King Claudius.
King Claudius is the catalyst that starts all of this because the rest of it wouldn't have happened if wouldn't have killed Hamlet's dad. So like he really
Yeah,
kicked off everything. So it's all kind of
absolutely did.
his fault in the end. So when I started thinking about like the similarities and stuff, I was like, okay, well obviously, we're still a lot different, thankfully. Yeah, not someone you want to aspire to be like, but trying to relate like, okay, like, everybody's had some point that they, told a lie about something or, they
Hmm.
had to deal with somebody that, was kind of shady and kind of, manipulative or something like that. So I took experiences like that and tried to apply and magnify those things like a lot to get to that level of trying to imagine like, okay, but what if I took this quality and took it to the extreme? So I
Yeah.
started being able to find the similarities then and relating it to, real things that had happened to me or people I'd known or things like that, and include that in my performance. And I think with a lot of characters, I think it adds a lot more nuance if you can also find, especially with a villain character, find something good or interesting about them, even if it's misguided. So, like with
Hmm.
King Claudius, the whole thing is like, okay, he does a lot of bad things, but at the end of the day, like, why is he doing these things? what
Yeah.
what drove him to do these things. It's not just because he's like, ha ha, I'm evil, but it's because I chose in my portrayal of him that he really did love Gertrude and that a lot of his actions were driven by genuinely loving and Gertrude being important to him. So, well, I think that he knew what he was doing was wrong, but he was able to justify it in some twisted way to himself that he was doing the right thing, that things were better off this way and things like that. So, even though he didn't fully believe that he was doing the right thing, he was able to kind of lie to himself and convince himself and manipulate himself in that way into thinking like justifying his actions into that, what he did was justified because he loved Gertrude and she was better off with him. So it was, better that he did what he did, even though it was, a really twisted way of going about it. But
Yeah.
trying to find that he ultimately thought that he was like, he kind of just opened a can of worms in that regard that he did this one action killing Hamlet's dad, thinking like, okay, that this will fix everything and I'll have power and I'll have, be able to have Gertrude's love and things like that. And but then, I think that he bit off more than he could chew and he didn't realize like what he was getting himself into when he took that
Hmm.
first action and everything else that would unfold because of that. So I feel like throughout the play, the rest of it, once he realizes, like, wait, I started this thing and it's kind of getting out of my control, the rest of it is him struggling to get that control back because he, for as much as he thought highly of himself and thinking, like, oh, I'm doing good choices, I'm not going to make any mistakes. He did make a lot of mistakes and then he had to deal with the consequences of those mistakes, but it's just they're constantly slipping out of his grasp and he's trying to recapture them. But circumstances and people's free will and things like that are things he can't control. And I think that makes him anxious at the end of the day, that there's things he can't control for as much as he thinks that he has all this power.
Yeah. And then the roadblocks that are in the way, and how do you work around them?
Exactly. Trying to
And
think, constantly circumvent everything else everyone's doing. And
yes. And I
yeah,
think that's you nail on the head with portraying a bad guy or a villain or, someone who is not a good person, it's not about how am I exactly like this person? It's
Yeah,
taking those life experiences and how can I find myself in them? How can I find them in me? And I think that
exactly.
is such a wonderful approach to a character like this. And, I know you spoke about having some outside perspective that kind of that you were able to pick and choose from to help you relate to this character. Was there any specifics that you were able to find sympathetic within him, if that
Yes.
makes sense?
Yeah, that does make sense. Mostly I sympathize with the fact that at the end of the day, he's very goal driven and motivated, and he is willing to do a lot of things for power and for Gertrude's love. And like, obviously, that's a quality taken to the extreme, but I
Mm-hmm.
was able to relate, like, okay, I think about times I've had goals and, times that I've, wanted someone's attention or something like that. I was able to, magnify those qualities and think like, okay, what if he took those qualities to the extreme? And
Mm-hmm.
when you take them to that extreme also in a way like he's doing terrible things, but you can kind of feel sorry for him because he thinks this is the right way of going about things, and these are things that he has such a yearning for that he's willing to do these horrible things to get these things when he would have been a lot better off just accepting the way things were or trying to do something going about it more positive way. So in that way you kind of can feel like a little bit of pity for him almost because he those things are so important to him, having love and attention and things like that. And, he probably feels a loss of control in his life, which is why he tries so desperately to do what he does to get control over it. And I think that those are things that if you look at it at that level and not at the level of his actions, that's something a lot of people can relate to. So I took that kind of approach of like, he thinks he's doing, he can justify to himself he's doing the right thing and he's willing to do all this to get what he wants. But at the end of the day, it's, he's doing it because he loves Gertrude and he is trying, he thinks he has a noble intention for doing so, even though at the end of the day, he doesn't quite believe that, but he can tell himself that and,
Yeah.
pray for forgiveness and stuff like that. But he's
Oof.
still, yeah, no, that was definitely a scene. But yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah,
So, on the topic of Shakespeare, and what a hell of a first role to dive into.
yeah.
Since you've been reading from the age of 13, were there any? I know we talked about how Hamlet was one of those favorites, but outside of that, and maybe it could be from Hamlet as well, but do you have any specific Shakespeare characters in mind, like the one that you're like, I want to tackle that one? Is there anything that comes to mind right away?
Um, Obviously Hamlet,
Yeah.
because that's Hamlet's one of the reasons that the story is one of my favorite of Shakespeare's stories is
Mm-hmm.
because he's, depending on how you play him, he can be really complex and it doesn't have to be like, some of the older fashioned versions. I feel he's more one note of just being brooding and stuff like that, but you can add a lot more nuance to him, and I think it can be fun to play with that. But also like in Hamlet, Horatio is also a dream role of mine for
Yeah.
Hamlet. Yeah. And I also would love to play Puck in A Midsummer Night's Dream. I did play a version of
Oh,
Puck in Shakespeare in Hollywood, which is Ken Ludwig, I believe, did the play. It's a play I did in
okay.
community theater, but it's basically some of the Shakespeare characters from Midsummer Night's Dream come into like 1930s Hollywood or something, or 1950s, I think rather. So I got to play a version of Puck in that, but it's not quite Shakespeare because it was basically a parody.
Yeah.
Um, but I would love to play actual Puck in A Midsummer Night's Dream. And also just because I think it would be a fun challenge. I also love Much Ado About Nothing. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and I would actually any of the I'd be happy to play anyone in that, but as a challenge, sometime I would like to play Don John actually because he's a character he's the villain in that, but he can be kind of if you play him the wrong way, in my opinion, he can be kind of boring because he has kind of a small role. But I think I
Mm-hmm.
would like the challenge of trying to take a role that doesn't have a whole lot to it necessarily, but is a villain role and make it interesting to make it kind of like there's no small roles, that whole phrase and stuff like that.
Absolutely.
Take that and take a character that a lot of people are like, oh, that's not that good of a role. They usually give that role to the worst actor in the troupe, and take that role though and elevate it.
Oh, fantastic. I
Yeah,
love that perspective because, yeah, that is a role. And there are plenty of roles in Shakespeare or anything that people are
exactly.
like, it's a small
Yeah,
role.
yeah,
I'm not going to
exactly.
worry about it. But those can be
Yeah.
so
They
impactful.
can take a role
Uh,
like that and then take it seriously and make it something interesting, make it something maybe more than what it was written to be, but do that. And I think that'd be an interesting challenge.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I share camaraderie in wanting to play Puck.
Yes, it seems
That is
so fun.
also a dream of mine as well. I got to
Good.
perform just a little piece of him in high school. And I
Good.
remember just being like, wow, I love this boy.
Yeah, so good.
I
So much
love our
fun.
boy Puck.
So
He
chaotic.
just a chaotic little silly guy, and
Yes. Like
goodness, we love him.
yeah. Weird little silly guy on stage goals.
Perfect, right?
Yeah.
You went way past that with kicking it off with King Claudius, and still
Yeah,
I commend you
definitely.
so much for it.
Thank you.
So a little bit more of I don't want to say intense question, but maybe an intense scenario. And I am kind of asking this one around. If the option of directing ever, like if that door was ever opened for you and the stars and the planets all aligned, because there's a lot that comes into play with
Yeah.
being a director and all of those things,
There is.
is there something that you would want to challenge yourself in directing when it came to Shakespeare?
Yes, first of all, if the opportunity to direct came around, I would definitely say yes to it because I've always wanted to do directing in a play type context. I have done directing for audio dramas and podcasts and things like that before, and
Oh,
also for
awesome.
games. Yeah, because I make games like visual novels and stuff like that and podcasts. So I've done directing for those. I think it'd be interesting to take those skills and have the additional challenge of converting it to stage because everything is live and you got to have everything together and everything like that, as
Mm-hmm.
opposed to a podcast you can do retakes and things like that. So um I would pretty much Hamlet obviously is the main choice for things that I think would be definitely a challenge to direct.
Yeah.
I have some ideas for a production of it that's set in the modern day that has some, it has the same dialogue and things like that and the same text as the play,
Mm-hmm.
but through the staging it gives it different context. So I have some ideas for like, and I some stuff with that. Um, I would also, I think like a surreal version, like even more than it already is, version of Midsummer Night's Dream might be interesting to direct.
Mm.
Um, and also, what is As You Like It? I think that would be a fun one
Ah,
to direct. Yes.
yes,
So yeah, it would.
that
So
would be a
there's a
fun
lot of
time.
them. Yeah. But yeah, so
Oh,
I definitely would say yes to directing. And I would, I feel like I could do an interesting take from a directing standpoint on any of the plays and, changing kind of like what we've been doing with the That's How We Roll productions of Shakespeare, taking them and adding different context to them that, brings them into the modern day or, adds extra nuance to it. And I think that that would be a lot of fun to do.
yeah, and unlocking what is so wonderful with the Shakespeare that we've done is unlocking and not being held down by gender roles,
Yeah, exactly.
the opportunity to expand these things. And I think that is
Exactly.
such a great and fun way to approach it, especially when it's something that's been around for so long and
Exactly.
very, especially back in the day, very male based, and that very stereotypical way.
Yeah.
Um, so
So I
yeah, I
think
think
it's,
it's a
yeah.
yes, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh yeah, you're fine. I think it's cool because the in a situation where you're, changing the gender roles around or stuff like that, you have an opportunity to add additional nuance and stuff based on who is performing that role and them saying those lines within the context of their identity, I think adds a lot to the roles and, breathes new life into some of the roles. And I think that that's both an interesting challenge and a fun way to approach it. I like taking things that are older and mixing them around and making new things out of them and especially thinking back like when Shakespeare wrote these things, he would not have expected this, but I feel like he would have. I thought it was cool. So at least I hope he would. But you know what? It's fun regardless.
Whether he would or wouldn't, we're doing
Exactly.
it.
Yeah, we're
We're
doing it. I
doing it,
don't care. At
William.
the end of the day, like, yep.
At the end of the
Yeah.
day, it's happening and you can't stop us.
Yeah, exactly.
So
Like
I
our
don't know
director
that
of
he
Midsummer
would.
Night's No, our director of Midsummer Night's Dream is like, we can do it when he's like, Shakespeare's dead. So we repeated that a
Yeah.
lot throughout rehearsal. Like, it doesn't matter if he would like it or not, we're doing it. We're gonna have fun with
I
it.
I love to know that that is a more universal thing because I remember in high school I had a theater teacher who's very much like the guy's dead. It
Yeah,
doesn't matter.
exactly.
Like we love
Exactly.
him. Thanks for
Yeah.
bringing such wonderful poetry into this world with
Yeah.
storytelling,
Yeah,
but you
exactly.
dead.
Yeah,
But you dead.
exactly. Yeah, I think that's a good
Uh,
approach to it. Not be too stuffy with it, not be too much of a purist and like, oh no, you gotta be exactly like the text. Like, I think it's better to expand on it and to, keep making new things out of it. I think that's how it continues on into the future.
yeah, it's very special. It's how we keep it
Yeah,
moving, keep it growing.
exactly.
I mean,
We don't
Shakespeare
let it
is,
stagnate. So, it's constantly
yeah,
changing.
and it's inspired so much. I mean, how many times has the story Romeo and Juliet been told
Yeah,
over and over
exactly.
and over
Yeah,
again in modern
exactly.
ways and olden ways?
Yeah.
Uh,
And a lot of
I
other,
think
countries and things like that have their own version of the story and stuff like that. Like, I think it's cool
exactly.
how there's story archetypes like that, get that do change and grow over time and do become new and different things in different people's hands throughout history.
Yeah. Ah, amazing.
Yeah.
So we had just a couple of questions that were sent in by some lovely audience members. And we have one that was from, again, hopefully I'm pronouncing your username right, Kalaki underscore Redbeard. They sent a message out for everyone, and their question was, what did you find that surprised you about the amazing performances of the other cast members? And so this isn't obviously necessarily meaning like, oh my God, so and so was my favorite. It was just like,
Yeah.
you know, what inspired you? What did you find, fascinating amongst working with such a big group of people? It's a
Yeah. There's a
Hamlet's a
lot
big
of people
one.
in the cast. Yeah. A lot of roles you can't double up in that one. But yeah, what was most impressive to me was seeing how my fellow performers took the content and changed it and made it their own and elevated it. That was super cool to me, especially because it was my first Shakespeare production. So seeing these words that I'd seen, people in movies perform and seen certain contexts, and usually those weren't gender swap roles or anything like that. So it was just very much, kind of the general normal way that it's done, seeing that stuff that I was so familiar with and seeing, these cool people that I'd met taking this and, breathing new life into it. And also kind of like you said about, me in rehearsal, watching how people started off versus as we worked on the material more, how they developed their characters, and just really watching how that bloomed and grew and things like that throughout rehearsal. That was really impressive to me. And it was really cool also being part of it because again, it was a story that I had heard so many times and I was so familiar with the language in it and stuff like that. But to actually be the person in there reading these words and then having these other awesome performers responding and us being in character together and stuff like that and actually being in the middle of all of that, that was really, really cool experience. And seeing just, how they like being able to play off how they interpreted the characters and the ways that they chose to interpret the characters also, was cool and surprising and things like that in its own ways. So being able to be like, oh, and I think that everyone had good camaraderie and everyone had good charisma together. So because of that, they were, everybody played well off each other. And I think that made it flow really smoothly and made it just really a lot of fun to be part of and a lot of fun to watch.
I couldn't agree anymore. And getting to share a few scenes with you as
Yes.
Guildenstern
Yes.
was
It was so fun.
such a fun
It
roller coaster
was.
of a
It
ride.
was.
Especially Guildenstern and Rosencrantz are obviously more silly little guys. We
They
love our
really
silly
are.
little guys from
We
Shakespeare.
do.
Um, and it was so fun to get such a different perspective from these characters and getting
Yeah.
to do these rehearsals with you and finding myself being like, yeah, I know Guildenstern, I know what I want to portray, and then
Yeah.
getting to read with you and read with Sarah and read with Kate,
Yeah.
all of these people together, I went, oh, I think this character is coming out of me a little bit different than I
Yeah, it helps you
expected.
understand the character better the more you play off it based on kind of how the other performers respond to your character. That kind of shows you like
Yeah,
how you want to play the character, and then you understand your character and their characters way better.
110%. So yes, thank you for that for me as well. It was a
Yeah,
very, very special moment to get to share.
yeah,
And it was
definitely.
my first time doing Hamlet as well.
Oh,
So
cool. Good for you.
very
That's awesome.
exciting
That
time.
is.
Well, Ashlee, thank you so much for taking the time to answer a few questions with
You're
us.
welcome.
Is there anything you'd like to tie off at the end here? Whether you've got some final thoughts on Shakespeare or King Claudius, and anything you might want to promote for the lovely people watching now?
I have a an Etsy shop, which is just yes. I sell lots
Oh
of cool Pride stuff and lots of frog stuff. I have lots of cool things on there. I just
my
got a new printer
gosh.
because my printer broke, so I can make stuff again. So I'm super excited. But
Yes.
yeah, that's just ashleecraft.etsy.com, and that will take you to my Etsy store. And you can see I have a lot of worm on a string things for all the people that like worms on a string. Yeah. So I have lots of fun and silly things on there. I have that, and I have probably a lot of the stuff, the most of the stuff I post usually is on Twitter, so that's just Ashlee_craft. But I have a lot of projects in the works at any given point in time. I have a production company called Exquisite Lore, and we have a lot of exciting things coming up. So there's going to be some super exciting announcements on there soon because we have the full version of my game, A Fishmas Carol, which will be coming out later this year. Yes,
Oh,
Christmas Carol, but all the characters are
Christmas
fish.
Carol.
Fishmas
Ah.
Carol. It is the full version of it with all, I think, 50 characters that appear in the book. So has I'm hand painting the backgrounds and hand painting the fish. So there's a great, amazing cast of voice actors in that. So I'm really excited about that. And we also have some exciting podcast projects and some other ones that are going to be resuming soon after taking hiatus, like Diary of Mothman. So lots of fun stuff.
Oh, amazing. Well,
Yeah,
I didn't know about the Etsy account, so I know that I will be looking that up
good.
after this interview. And also, I mean, y'all heard it. Ashlee has so many lovely things going on. So please be sure to go follow him over on social media and keep up with all of that. Okay. Thank you again so much for being here. I have been your lovely Cat/Guildenstern running the interview. And yeah, thank you again, Ashlee.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.